The handcuffs clicked around my wrists as Sheriff Corinne Thompson stood over me with that twisted smile I had grown to hate. My Honda Civic sat there in the festival parking lot, doors wide open, as she held up a small plastic bag filled with what looked like white powder. "Well, well," she said loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Looks like we found some interesting cargo in your piece of junk car." That was the moment I realized this corrupt sheriff had just made the biggest mistake of her career. It was a Tuesday morning in September when I first encountered Sheriff Corinne Thompson. I was driving my 15-year-old Honda Civic through the quiet streets of Millbrook, heading to check on some properties I owned in the nicer part of town. The car had served me well over the years, reliable and economical, though it certainly did not turn heads. The autumn leaves were just beginning to change colors, painting the tree-lined streets in shades of gold and red. I had always loved this time of year in our small town. There was something peaceful about the way the morning light filtered through the branches, casting long shadows across the pavement. That peace was shattered when I saw the flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled over immediately, my hands already reaching for my wallet before the patrol car had even come to a complete stop. I had been driving these streets for over 20 years and had never been pulled over. My driving record was spotless. Sheriff Thompson stepped out of her cruiser with an attitude that immediately put me on edge. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with short blonde hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. Her uniform was pressed and perfect, her badge gleaming in the morning sun. "License and registration," she barked before she had even reached my window. I handed over my documents with a polite smile. "Good morning, officer. May I ask what this is about?" She barely glanced at my license before her eyes fixed on my car's interior, scanning every inch like she was expecting to find something incriminating. "What are you doing driving through this neighborhood?" The question caught me off guard. "I beg your pardon." "This is a nice area," she continued, her voice dripping with suspicion. "People here drive decent cars. This piece of junk stands out like a sore thumb." I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I was just driving through, officer. I have not broken any traffic laws." Sheriff Thompson walked around my car slowly, examining it like it was evidence at a crime scene. "Yeah, well, suspicious behavior is suspicious behavior. People in this neighborhood pay good money to live somewhere safe, and they do not need sketchy individuals cruising around in rust buckets." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had worked my entire life to build something meaningful, to contribute to this community, and here was this woman judging me solely based on the age of my vehicle. "I understand your concerns," I said carefully, "but I assure you I have every right to drive on public roads." She handed my license back with a look of disgust. "Just remember what I said. This is a warning. Keep your junker out of places where it does not belong, and we will not have any problems." As she walked back to her patrol car, I sat there in stunned silence. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. I had been treated like a criminal for the simple act of driving through my own town in a car that happened to be older than what she deemed appropriate. I watched her drive away, her message clear. In Sheriff Corinne Thompson's world, your worth as a human being was measured by the price tag of your vehicle. Over the following weeks, I began to notice things I had never paid attention to before. It started with small observations, moments that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but formed a disturbing pattern when viewed together. I was at the grocery store on a Thursday afternoon when I saw Sheriff Thompson pull over Maria Santos in the parking lot. Maria was a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her 3 children. Her minivan was old and had a dent in the rear bumper, but it was clean and well-maintained. I watched from inside the store as the sheriff approached Maria's vehicle with the same aggressive posture she had used with me. Even from a distance, I could see Maria's shoulders tense as Thompson began speaking. The conversation grew heated quickly, with the sheriff gesturing dismissively at the minivan while Maria tried to explain something. When I left the store 20 minutes later, Maria was still there, now holding a citation and wiping tears from her eyes. I approached her carefully, not wanting to intrude but unable to ignore her distress. "Are you all right?" I asked gently. Maria looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. She gave me a ticket for having an obstructed view because of a small air freshener hanging from my mirror. $250. Her voice broke slightly. "I cannot afford this right now." The next incident happened 3 days later. I was leaving the bank when I saw Sheriff Thompson harassing elderly Mr. Chen, who had been a fixture in our community for over 30 years. His pickup truck was 20 years old but immaculately maintained. He took pride in that vehicle, washing it every weekend and keeping it in perfect mechanical condition. But none of that mattered to Sheriff Thompson. She had pulled him over allegedly for not coming to a complete stop at a stop sign, though I had watched him drive through that intersection, and he had definitely stopped fully. "Maybe if you drove something that actually belonged on the road, you would be able to see the stop signs better," I heard her say as I walked past. Mr. Chen's face was flushed with embarrassment and confusion. In all his years in America, he had never been spoken to with such disrespect by a law enforcement officer. I began carrying my phone with me everywhere, discreetly recording whenever I witnessed one of these incidents. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Sheriff Thompson exclusively targeted people driving older, modest vehicles. She issued expensive citations for minor infractions that would normally result in warnings. Her treatment of these drivers was consistently degrading and unprofessional. Meanwhile, I watched her wave and smile at drivers of luxury vehicles, even when they committed obvious traffic violations right in front of her. A Mercedes ran a red light at the intersection of Main and Oak Street, while Thompson was sitting at the adjacent corner. She did not even turn her head. But when Mrs. Patterson's 15-year-old Corolla had a slightly dim taillight, Thompson pulled her over and issued a citation with a lecture about safety and responsibility that lasted 20 minutes. The realization hit me like a cold slap in the face. This was not just prejudice or poor judgment. This was systematic harassment based entirely on perceived wealth and social status. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had appointed herself as the guardian of Millbrook's class divisions, using her badge and authority to punish people whose only crime was not being wealthy enough to drive newer cars. I thought about Maria Santos, working 2 jobs and struggling to pay an unfair citation. I thought about Mr. Chen's confused and hurt expression as he tried to understand why he was being treated like a criminal. I thought about Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher living on a fixed income, having to choose between paying Thompson's citation and buying her medication that month. The anger that had been simmering since my own encounter with Thompson began to boil over. Someone needed to do something about this corrupt sheriff and her twisted sense of justice. As I sat in my Honda Civic that evening, reviewing the videos I had captured on my phone, I made a decision. If no one else was going to stand up to Sheriff Corinne Thompson, then I would have to do it myself. What Sheriff Thompson did not know, what almost no one in Millbrook knew, was that the man driving that piece of junk, Honda Civic, was actually one of the wealthiest individuals in 3 counties. My name is Robert Martinez, and I am the owner and founder of Thompson Valley Auto Group, the largest network of car dealerships in the region. I own 4 locations: Honda, Toyota, Ford, and a luxury lot that sells BMW, Mercedes, and Audi vehicles. My dealerships employ over 200 people and generate millions in revenue each year. But wealth had not changed who I was at my core. I grew up in a family where my father worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. My mother cleaned houses during the day and worked at a diner at night. They taught me that your character is not determined by what you own, but by how you treat other people, especially those who cannot do anything for you in return. When I started my first dealership 25 years ago with a loan against my house and a prayer, I made a promise to myself. I would treat every customer with the same respect, whether they were buying a used economy car or a brand new luxury vehicle. A person's worth is not measured by their bank account. That philosophy had served me well. My dealerships had the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the state because we treated people fairly. We worked with customers who had bad credit, helped families find reliable transportation within their budgets, and never made anyone feel ashamed for not being able to afford something expensive. I had deliberately chosen to maintain a low profile in the community. I drove modest cars, dressed simply, and avoided the social circles where wealthy people typically gathered. Most of my employees did not even know I was the owner. They thought I was just another manager. This anonymity allowed me to see how people really acted when they thought you had no power or influence. It revealed their true character in ways that wealth and status never could. Sheriff Corinne Thompson had revealed her character to me quite clearly. The irony of the situation was almost laughable, if it were not so infuriating. Here was a woman who spent her days insulting and harassing people based on the age of their vehicles, completely unaware that she was talking to someone who could single-handedly impact the automotive market in the entire region. My dealerships sold over 3,000 vehicles per year. Local mechanics, parts suppliers, insurance agents, and finance companies all depended on the business we generated. When I recommended a service provider to my customers, it could make or break their business. I had built relationships with banks, credit unions, and lending institutions throughout the state. My word carried weight in financial circles that Thompson could not even imagine. But more importantly, I had built a reputation based on integrity and fairness. When I spoke, people listened, because they knew I would never use my influence for personal gain or petty revenge. That reputation was about to become Sheriff Corinne Thompson's worst nightmare. As I sat in my office that evening, looking out over the car lot where hundreds of vehicles gleamed under the fluorescent lights, I began to formulate a plan. Thompson thought she could judge and harass people based on their appearances. She was about to learn that appearances can be very deceiving. The woman who had made a career out of bullying people she perceived as powerless was about to discover that she had picked a fight with someone who had more power than she could possibly comprehend. I have learned over the years that successful business requires careful research and attention to detail. Before making any major decision, I gather all available information and analyze it from every possible angle. My investigation into Sheriff Corinne Thompson would be no different. I started by using my business connections to learn more about Thompson's background and recent activities. The automotive industry is smaller than most people realize, and information travels quickly between dealers, mechanics, and suppliers. What I discovered made my blood run cold. 3 months earlier, Sheriff Thompson had purchased a brand new BMW X7 from Sterling Motors, a dealership located in the next county over. The vehicle had a sticker price of over $70,000, which seemed unusual for someone earning a sheriff's salary in a small town like Millbrook. But that was just the beginning. Through discreet conversations with other business owners in town, I learned that Thompson had been actively steering wealthy residents away from local dealerships. When someone mentioned they were shopping for a car, Thompson would immediately recommend Sterling Motors, claiming that local dealers were unreliable and overpriced. This behavior struck me as highly suspicious, so I decided to dig deeper. I contacted a friend who worked in the finance department at Sterling Motors and asked some careful questions about their recent sales practices. What he told me confirmed my worst suspicions. Marcus Webb, the owner of Sterling Motors, had been providing Thompson with substantial cash payments in exchange for her recommendations. These payments were disguised as consultation fees for security services that were never actually provided. The scheme was simple but effective. Thompson would badmouth local dealerships to potential customers, particularly wealthy ones who might be intimidated by a sheriff's negative opinion. She would then recommend Sterling Motors as the only trustworthy option in the region. In return, Webb would pay Thompson a percentage of each sale she generated, plus additional bonuses for steering high-end customers his way. I obtained copies of bank records that showed regular deposits into Thompson's personal account from Sterling Motors, deposits that coincided perfectly with luxury vehicle sales to Millbrook residents. But the corruption went even deeper than simple kickbacks. Thompson had been using her position as sheriff to gather intelligence on wealthy residents in the community. She would run license plate checks and background searches to identify people with high incomes or valuable assets. This information was then passed along to Webb, who would target these individuals with aggressive sales tactics. When someone resisted Webb's sales pressure, Thompson would find reasons to pull them over and make their lives difficult until they gave in and bought a car from Sterling Motors. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Sheriff Corinne Thompson was not just a classist bully. She was a corrupt official who was actively betraying her oath of office for personal financial gain. As I compiled the evidence, I realized the scope of her betrayal extended far beyond what I had initially suspected. She was not just harassing people who drove modest cars out of prejudice. She was systematically targeting them to create fear and uncertainty in the community, making people afraid to drive older vehicles and pressuring them to buy newer ones from her partner in crime. The elderly residents, single mothers, and working-class families she had been terrorizing were not random victims. They were strategic targets in a scheme designed to generate illegal profits at the expense of the most vulnerable members of our community. I thought about Maria Santos, struggling to pay that unfair citation while Thompson counted kickback money from luxury car sales. I thought about Mr. Chen, humiliated and confused, while Thompson planned her next deposit from Sterling Motors. The anger I felt was no longer just about personal insult or wounded pride. This was about justice for an entire community that had been betrayed by someone they trusted to protect them. Sheriff Corinne Thompson was about to learn that her corruption had consequences. Planning the downfall of a corrupt sheriff required the same strategic thinking I used to build my business empire. Every detail had to be perfect, every contingency planned for, and every piece of evidence documented and verified. I began by reaching out to the people Thompson had wronged, starting with Maria Santos. I found Maria working her evening shift at the local diner, her face still showing the stress and exhaustion of someone trying to make ends meet. When I approached her during her break, she was initially suspicious of my interest in her encounter with Sheriff Thompson. "Why do you want to know about that?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. I explained carefully that I had witnessed Thompson's pattern of harassment and was gathering evidence to expose her corruption. I did not reveal my true identity or wealth, presenting myself simply as a concerned citizen who had also been targeted. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she described the impact of Thompson's citation on her family. "I had to take money from my daughter's college fund to pay that fine," she whispered. "She was so looking forward to starting school next year." I assured Maria that justice would be served and asked if she would be willing to provide a formal statement about her experience. She agreed immediately, desperate for someone to finally hold Thompson accountable. Mr. Chen was more hesitant when I approached him at his small grocery store. As an immigrant who had worked hard to build a life in America, he was deeply afraid of challenging authority figures. "I do not want trouble," he said, shaking his head. "Maybe it is better to stay quiet." I spent an hour with Mr. Chen, explaining that Thompson's behavior was not representative of American justice, and that he had every right to be treated with respect regardless of his accent or the age of his vehicle. Eventually, his anger at the unfair treatment overcame his fear, and he agreed to help. One by one, I contacted every person I had witnessed being harassed by Thompson. Each had a similar story of humiliation, unfair citations, and financial hardship caused by her corruption. But gathering victim testimony was only one part of my plan. Working with my most trusted managers at the dealerships, I developed a sophisticated sting operation. We created a fake identity for one of my employees, complete with a detailed backstory and financial profile that would make him appear to be a wealthy potential customer. This employee would approach Thompson in a social setting and casually mention that he was shopping for a luxury vehicle. If our suspicions were correct, Thompson would immediately recommend Sterling Motors and begin her usual sales pitch. Meanwhile, I was coordinating with a local investigative journalist who had been looking into corruption in small-town law enforcement. I provided her with copies of all the financial records and evidence I had gathered, along with detailed accounts from Thompson's victims. The journalist was eager to pursue the story, especially after I showed her the bank records proving the kickback scheme between Thompson and Marcus Webb. But the centerpiece of my plan was much more personal. The annual Millbrook Community Festival was scheduled for the following weekend. This event brought together hundreds of residents, local officials, business leaders, and families for a day of food, music, and community celebration. Sheriff Thompson would be there in an official capacity, providing security for the event. She would be in uniform, representing the authority and integrity of law enforcement in our community. And I would be there too, driving my modest Honda Civic, presenting myself as the same humble target she had harassed and insulted. But this time, when Thompson inevitably approached me with her usual routine of class-based harassment, she would be doing it in front of witnesses. Lots of witnesses. The mayor would be there. The county supervisor would be there. Members of the town council, local business leaders, and hundreds of voters would all be watching. And when the moment was right, when Thompson had fully revealed her corrupt and prejudiced character to the entire community, I would reveal mine. The woman who thought she could judge people by their cars was about to learn that the quiet man in the old Honda had been playing a much longer game than she could possibly imagine. Everything was in place. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. The Millbrook Community Festival was in full swing when I arrived that Saturday morning. The town square was decorated with colorful banners, food trucks lined the streets, and families had spread blankets on the grass for picnics. Children ran between the booths while their parents browsed local crafts and enjoyed live music from the main stage. I parked my Honda Civic in the designated festival parking area, choosing a spot that would be clearly visible from the main walkway. The car looked exactly as it always did, clean but obviously aged, reliable but far from impressive. Sheriff Thompson was easy to spot in her crisp uniform, standing near the entrance with her arms crossed and that familiar look of superiority on her face. She was scanning the crowd like a predator looking for prey, and I knew it would not be long before her attention turned to my vehicle. I spent the first hour of the festival mingling with other attendees, greeting neighbors, and enjoying the community atmosphere. The mayor was there with his family, along with several members of the town council. County Supervisor Williams had driven down from the county seat specifically for this event. Perfect, the audience was exactly what I had hoped for. I was examining a booth selling handmade jewelry when I heard the familiar sound of Thompson's boots approaching behind me. "Well, well," she said loudly enough to draw attention from nearby festival goers. "Look what we have here." I turned to face her with a polite smile. "Good morning, Sheriff Thompson. Beautiful day for the festival, is it not?" Her eyes were already fixed on my Honda, visible through the crowd about 50 yards away. "I thought I told you to keep that piece of junk out of places where it does not belong." The conversations around us began to quiet as people sensed the tension in Thompson's voice. A small crowd was beginning to form, curious about what was happening. "I am sorry," I said calmly, "but I do not understand. This is a community event open to all residents. I live here, I pay taxes here, and I have every right to attend." Thompson stepped closer, her voice rising. "Rights do not give you permission to bring that eyesore to a family event. People here work hard to maintain certain standards, and your rust bucket is dragging down the whole atmosphere." I could see people beginning to murmur to each other, some looking uncomfortable with Thompson's aggressive tone. Mayor Davidson had noticed the commotion and was walking in our direction, along with several other officials. "Sheriff," I said evenly, "I am curious about exactly what law I am breaking by driving my legally registered and insured vehicle to a public event." This question seemed to infuriate Thompson even more. "Do not get smart with me," she snapped. "I know your type. You think you can go anywhere and do anything just because it is technically legal. Well, I am here to tell you that there are standards in this community, and people like you need to learn your place." The crowd was growing larger now, with families stopping their festival activities to watch the confrontation. I could see shock and disapproval on many faces as Thompson's classist rants became more extreme and public. "People like me?" I asked, maintaining my calm demeanor despite the anger building in my chest. "Yeah, people with no respect for themselves or their community," Thompson continued, her voice echoing across the festival grounds. "People who think they can drive around in garbage and park next to decent folks without any consideration for how it affects property values and community image." She gestured dismissively toward my Honda. "That thing belongs in a junkyard, not at a family event. Maybe if you put some effort into bettering yourself instead of dragging everyone else down, you would understand why people do not want to look at your trashy lifestyle choices." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the music from the main stage seemed muted as Thompson's words hung in the air like poison. I looked around at the faces surrounding us. There was the Jenkins family who drove a 10-year-old minivan, The Rodriguez family with their modest sedan, elderly Mrs. Patterson with her aging Corolla, working families, retirees on fixed incomes, young people just starting their careers. All of them were hearing Sheriff Corinne Thompson explain exactly what she thought of people who could not afford new cars. Mayor Davidson finally reached us, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Sheriff Thompson, what exactly is going on here?" Thompson turned to the mayor with a confident smile, apparently oblivious to the hostile reaction of the crowd. "Just explaining to this gentleman that the festival has certain standards, Mayor. We cannot have every piece of junk in town cluttering up our community celebration." The mayor looked at me apologetically, then back at Thompson with obvious disapproval. "Sheriff, this man has every right to attend the festival. I think you owe him an apology." "Apology?" Thompson laughed harshly. "For what? For trying to maintain some dignity in this community." That was the moment I realized Thompson had sealed her own fate. She had revealed her true character in front of the entire community, and there was no taking it back. The trap was sprung. Now it was time for the revelation. I stood there in the center of that crowd, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. Sheriff Thompson had just finished her rant about standards and dignity, her face flushed with righteous indignation. The silence that followed was deafening. Mayor Davidson looked mortified. County Supervisor Williams was shaking his head in disgust. Families with children were staring at Thompson like she had lost her mind. "Sheriff Thompson," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd, "I appreciate your concern about community standards. Since you seem so interested in judging people by their vehicles, I think it is time you learned exactly who you have been talking to." Thompson crossed her arms defiantly. "I do not care if you are the Pope. Trash is trash." I smiled sadly at her response. "My name is Robert Martinez. I am the owner and founder of Thompson Valley Auto Group. I own the Honda dealership on Route 9, the Toyota dealership on Main Street, the Ford dealership on Industrial Boulevard, and the luxury car lot on Highland Avenue." The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs. Thompson's confident expression began to crack as the implications of my words sank in. "That Honda Civic you have been insulting," I continued, "is one of dozens of vehicles I own. I drive it because I choose to, not because I have to. I have a garage at home with cars worth more than most people make in a year, but I prefer to drive something modest because it reminds me where I came from." Thompson's face had gone pale, but I was not finished. "Over the past several weeks, I have been documenting your systematic harassment of residents who drive older vehicles. Maria Santos, Mr. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, and at least a dozen others have been subjected to your abuse for no reason other than your personal prejudices." I pulled out my phone and held it up for the crowd to see. "But more importantly, I have been investigating your financial relationship with Marcus Webb at Sterling Motors. The kickbacks, the referral fees, the illegal steering of customers away from local businesses." Thompson tried to interrupt, but I raised my voice to continue. "Sheriff, you have been taking bribes in exchange for using your badge to intimidate and harass citizens into buying cars from your partner in corruption. You have betrayed your oath of office and violated the trust of every person in this community." The crowd was buzzing with shock and anger now. People were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. County Supervisor Williams had stepped forward, his face grim with authority. "These are very serious accusations, Mr. Martinez," Williams said. "Do you have evidence to support these claims?" I nodded and handed him a folder I had been carrying. Bank records showing regular payments from Sterling Motors to Sheriff Thompson's personal account, testimony from victims of her harassment, documentation of her steering customers away from local businesses to benefit her criminal partner. Thompson finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate squeak. "This is ridiculous. You cannot prove anything." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "Because unlike you, Sheriff, I built my success on integrity and careful documentation. Every transaction, every conversation, every illegal payment has been recorded and verified." Mayor Davidson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Sheriff Thompson, you are relieved of duty immediately pending a full investigation. Please surrender your badge and weapon." "You cannot do this to me," Thompson shouted, her composure completely shattered. "I am the sheriff of this county." "Not anymore," County Supervisor Williams said firmly. "Mr. Martinez, I want you to turn over all of your evidence to Internal Affairs immediately. We will be conducting a full criminal investigation." The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunderous ovation. Maria Santos was there with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Chen was nodding with satisfaction. Mrs. Patterson was smiling for the first time in months. But I felt no joy in Thompson's downfall, only sadness that it had taken so long for justice to be served. "Sheriff Thompson," I said as she was being escorted away by other officers, "I want you to remember something. The people you have been tormenting are not poor because they lack character. They are honest, hard-working members of this community who deserve respect regardless of what they drive." Thompson turned back to glare at me with pure hatred. "You think you have won something here? You think this changes anything?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "It changes everything, because now everyone knows that your badge does not give you the right to judge people by their possessions. And more importantly, they know that actions have consequences, even for corrupt sheriffs who think they are above the law." As Thompson was led away in handcuffs, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. But I could not celebrate. Too many people had been hurt by her corruption. Too much damage had been done to trust in law enforcement. The real work was just beginning. The weeks following the festival confrontation moved quickly. Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive investigation based on the evidence I had provided, and what they discovered exceeded even my worst expectations about Thompson's corruption. The financial records revealed that Thompson had received over $40,000 in kickbacks from Sterling Motors over the course of 18 months. She had steered nearly 100 customers away from local dealerships, costing honest businesses hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue. But the corruption went deeper than simple bribery. Investigators found that Thompson had been running background checks on wealthy residents without cause, gathering personal financial information that she shared with Marcus Webb to help him target high-value customers. She had also been manipulating traffic enforcement statistics to create artificial justification for her harassment of drivers with modest vehicles. Citations issued to luxury car owners were routinely dismissed or reduced, while penalties for drivers of older cars were increased whenever possible. Within a month, Thompson was formally charged with bribery, abuse of office, violation of civil rights, and conspiracy to defraud. Marcus Webb faced similar charges for his role in the scheme. Both eventually pled guilty rather than face trial, though Thompson maintained to the end that she had done nothing wrong. Thompson was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to her victims. She lost her pension, her benefits, and any possibility of working in law enforcement again. Webb received 2 years, and was forced to close Sterling Motors permanently. But for me, punishment was not enough. Justice required healing the damage that had been done to our community. I established the Millbrook Community Justice Fund with an initial contribution of $100,000. This fund provided financial assistance to everyone who had been victimized by Thompson's corrupt practices. Maria Santos received enough money to restore her daughter's college fund and cover the family's living expenses while she looked for better employment. Mr. Chen was compensated for every unfair citation he had received, plus additional funds to help expand his grocery store. Mrs. Patterson and dozens of other victims received similar assistance, not just money, but also connections to resources that helped improve their lives in lasting ways. I also used my influence in the automotive industry to bring new businesses to Millbrook. A regional parts supplier opened a distribution center that created 50 new jobs. 2 independent mechanics received low-interest loans to expand their shops. The increased economic activity helped revitalize downtown and provided better services for residents who could not afford to travel to larger cities for car repairs. The most important change, however, was not economic but cultural. At the next town council meeting, I spoke about the importance of treating all residents with equal respect regardless of their economic status. I shared stories of the harassment that working families had endured and challenged the community to do better. Sheriff Thompson's corruption was possible because too many of us stayed silent when we saw injustice, I said to the packed meeting room. We allowed prejudice and classism to flourish in our community because it was easier to look away than to speak up. The response was overwhelming. Citizens organized volunteer groups to help elderly residents with transportation. The food bank received record donations. Local businesses began offering discounts and payment plans to help families struggling with basic needs. Most importantly, the hearing process for Thompson's replacement emphasized community service and respect for all residents. The new sheriff, Captain Sarah Williams, had grown up in a working-class family and understood the importance of treating everyone fairly regardless of their circumstances. 6 months after the festival confrontation, I was driving my Honda Civic through the same neighborhood where Thompson had first harassed me. But everything had changed. The streets felt different now, more welcoming and inclusive. I pulled over at the same spot where Thompson had lectured me about keeping my piece of junk out of nice neighborhoods. A young mother was walking past with her children, heading to the nearby park. She smiled and waved when she saw me, completely comfortable with my presence in her neighborhood. That simple gesture meant more to me than any business success I had ever achieved. I learned something important through this experience. True wealth is not measured by the cars you own or the size of your bank account. It is measured by your impact on the lives of others and your commitment to justice and fairness. Sheriff Corinne Thompson thought she could judge people by their possessions. In the end, she was judged by her actions and found wanting. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Power without integrity is corruption. Wealth without compassion is meaningless. And sometimes, the most important battles are fought not in boardrooms or courthouses, but in the hearts and minds of a community that decides to stand up for what is right. Sheriff Thompson had insulted my car, not knowing I owned the dealership. But more importantly, she had insulted the dignity of hardworking people who deserved better from their public servants. In the end, justice was served not through revenge, but through accountability, restitution, and a community's commitment to treating all people with the respect they deserve.